Hi, and welcome to our webinar called Speaking Truth to Power, Developing a Sharp Policy Proposal. My name is Lisa Lundgren. I am from Gothenburg, and I'm currently studying a Bachelor in European Studies.
Hi everyone, my name is Petter and I study political science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the University of Gothenburg. I've been a youth fellow since the 2019 International Youth Think Tank.
Yes, so we are here since we represent the International Youth Think Tank. We are a Gothenburg-based think tank, and we work to promote democracy and liberal values. And initially, our plan was to start right away and tell you guys about our policy creating process in the think tank. However, just the other day, we got some really good news, which made us have to change the structure of our webinar a little bit. And this is because we have a guest with us today, at least for the initial 15 minutes. And what could be more soothing when talking about influencing policymakers than to be joined by a person who actually holds political power? So we welcome you, Hans Dahlgren, the EU Minister of Sweden, to our webinar. And we would love to hear your thoughts about how we as young people can influence the decision-making process and help to change the world. So please take the floor, and when you're done, we will have time for some questions for you, Hans.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you, Petter, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in the European Youth Forum. And I'm particularly glad because I consider this forum as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is something that we are right now involved in all over Europe in the European Union. And I think this exercise that we are having right now is a very good example of what this conference is all about. I'll say a few words to start with, to try to answer and then answer any of your questions that you may have on this very important issue of democracy and influence. You know, we celebrate in Sweden right now, this year, that we have had 100 years of democracy. It's exactly 100 years since both men and women were given an equal right to vote in our elections. But as we know, democracy is not just about voting every 3 or 4 years or whenever it is. It is so much more, including, of course, freedom of information, the freedom to seek and to find information about all the issues that are relevant in our political debates. It's freedom of the press, freedom for journalists to cover proceedings of all our political organs. It's a question of non-discrimination of minorities, very important these days. It's respect for the rule of law. That's a basic thing where we had some troubles in several European countries right now, and so on. So this is the wide concept of democracy, in my view. But to me, a true democracy also must involve a substantial segment of citizens' participation, that we not only know how our society works, but also that we know what the government at all levels can do and what it cannot do, and that we are as involved as possible and engaged in the discussions of issues that are a concern to all of us. And for me, as the Minister for EU Affairs in the Swedish cabinet, it's natural to stress that this applies not only to the local government or the regional government or the national government with parliament and so on, but also to the European level. Because much of what is decided by the Council of Europe and the European Parliament directly affects citizens all over Sweden as well as in all our member states. And therefore, it is a very important part of all this democratic involvement and engagement that I'm talking about. As you know, there are certainly some issues in our life today that can simply not be solved just by action in each country by itself, like here in Sweden. Take the most obvious example, I think, the climate issue and environmental issues generally. How dependent we are on a common effort to halt the climate crisis and make sure that we diminish gas-house emissions and so on. This is whatever, even if we had the best of intentions in one country like Sweden, we couldn't fix this just by ourselves. We need to do it together in Europe, but also globally. And I'm glad that the European Union has taken the lead very much on the climate front. Another example is trafficking and organized crime. This is, as the name says, trafficking. It goes over national borders. We need cooperation. We need better cooperation between police forces and prosecutors and tax authorities and immigration authorities in our respective countries. We have a terrible development in some Swedish cities recently with the shootings and explosions, as you know. And we need also European cooperation to deal with this. Migration is another issue that's obviously a European issue and must be a European issue, because it's not fair that only a few countries take the responsibility for dealing with asylum seekers that come to Europe, like the frontline states in Italy or Spain or Malta or Greece. Nor is it fair that just a few countries would be the ones that give most of the asylum seekers refuge, like Sweden and Germany during the refugee crisis in the 2015. We have to do this together. Also trade, of course. You know, Sweden's economy is built very much on trade abroad, and everything that we sell, 75% ends up in another EU country. So the fact that we have a single market without any customs checks or whatever, it's extremely important for our industry and therefore for our welfare and for the jobs in our country. So it's all hangs together, I think. And to have a full democracy, I think it's really a need for the citizens to engage in discussions also on these issues that also cover many other countries. So that is the whole idea behind this conference on the future of Europe, to engage more and more citizens in a debate on what are the best European solutions. And I would say, in particular, this applies to young people. And this conference, it's organized so that it gives a very prominent role to younger Europeans in various ways, actually. As part of the younger generation, the best you can do is to engage yourself in these matters of common European interests. That can also be great fun, I think. It will teach you new things. It may lead to many new and interesting contacts. It will certainly improve our democracy, I think, by adding to involvement and adding to engagement also at the European level. So with that pro-European pitch, I will end these short remarks and be ready to answer any of your questions, Lisa and Petter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hans. And just for those who joined late, just a quick update. We are very lucky to have Hans Dahlgren here, the EU Minister of Sweden. And he just talked about basically the importance of democracy and what we can do as young people. So now it is time for some questions. And I will go first, since I and Petter already prepared a question that we would like to ask you, Hans. And after that, we will ask some of your questions when we receive the comments in the chat. So our question for you is this. Hans, you have long and varied experience in top politics. So we would like to know what your best advice is to young people who want to really make a change in the world. Would you say that joining a political party is the most effective way of gaining influence? Or is it possible to gain influence and power via think tanks and NGOs or activism? What would you say is the best way? Thank you.
Well, when you pose the question, I'm thinking actually of two keywords in this respect. They are knowledge and contacts. Knowledge and contacts. And let me talk about knowledge first. Of course, in the international sphere, it's always useful to have to know one or more foreign languages. So to study languages is a very good start for an international work, of course. But it's not just a question of that, it's also a question of knowledge of the issues. I mean, all of us who have studied whatever part of our school system, we know that making the homework is essential for making good results. And this is something one can't skip. There is no way around this. You have to know the issues. And if you listen to Greta Thunberg, for example, when she, as one of the best communicators on the climate issue, she tells us always, listen to the scientists. And I think that's an extremely good advice, to read what the scientists really say about the future of the planet if we don't act on the climate issue. It came a report this summer from the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, a UN organization. If you want to work on the climate issue, that would be a very good start to read that report. What are the scientists saying will happen if we don't act, and if we don't act now? So knowledge is number one. The other is contacts. You have to reach out to other people, talk with other people, discuss with other people. You can do it in the class, in the school, of course. You can do it in a university, in the groups there. You can also do it in study circles. You do not have to join a political party, to answer your question, Lisa, directly. It helps, of course, because there you can find people who are basically of the same values as yourself, and it may be easier to produce a political platform and also to nominate candidates for public office and for posts within the party organization. But it's not a prerequisite for activism. I mean, you mentioned yourself to be involved in a non-governmental organization or taking part in study groups, or just manifest your views together with others, like the Greta Thunberg has done every Friday outside the parliament here for a long time. That's basically also ways to take contacts, but do it together with others. That's the most promising way forward, I think. And then, of course, we have the media. When I grew up, there wasn't much of a media, such a richness of media as we have today. We had one television channel in black and white, and we had perhaps more newspapers than we have today. But social media was, of course, not invented yet, because we didn't have an internet. Now we have all forms of platforms to express yourself on. Sometimes the language used in these social media is not too tempting to engage in, because it seems rather hostile, but it is basically an extremely useful platform, particularly for young people, as I understand it. So that would be my answer to your questions, Lisa.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we have a lot of questions, but we don't have a lot of time. So one quick question would be from Alba. How can citizens influence EU decisions? What are your top advice?
Well, I think right now the best way is to engage in this conference on the future of Europe. And we have meetings of the kind that we are engaged in right now all over Europe now to discuss a political issue that is meant to influence the institutions in Europe, and will certainly be listened to by ministers like myself and by the parliamentarians in the European Parliament. There is a special platform you can find on the website of the European Union for registering your views, and also make a list of activities. So you can, after this, go in there on this platform and make some notes about what the discussion was all about. Or as an individual, you go to that platform and register your view on any of the subjects that are discussed in this broad debate. And all these views will later on, sometimes next spring, be collected by the executive board for this conference and collected in a way that will summarize what are the views that have been expressed during this conference. Of course, we don't know exactly how representative these views will be, but it will be an opportunity to manifest your personal position on the climate or on migration or on security or on welfare politics in Europe, or how to improve our competitiveness and Europe's role in the world, just to mention a few issues. So it's wide open to you. So go ahead. That's my advice.
Thank you so much, Hans, and thank you for answering our questions. We have received even more questions in the chat, but unfortunately, we do not have time for more questions since I know that you need to leave for other meetings. So
Actually,
thank you so much for...
It's a Thursday today, and this is the day when the Swedish cabinet meets every Thursday at 9:30, and its cabinet room is a bit away from here, so I just have to leave now. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bye. And we will move on with our webinar. So I believe that we have a PowerPoint slide to share with you. There we go. So now we will continue with the actual webinar, and the purpose of this webinar is to talk about developing a sharp policy proposal. Yes. So the structure of today's event is that we will begin by telling you about the IYTT policy loop, and then we will guide you through every step of the process. We will talk about each step of this policy loop thoroughly, and we will tell you about our personal experiences of creating a policy proposal and turning it into a policy brief. So along the way, we will give you some tips and tricks, some do's and don'ts for when you are to create a policy brief on your own. And we've designed this seminar to be interactive. So we really hope that you guys can remain active and ask questions and comments in the chat. Type your immediate reactions. Don't hesitate to ask questions and vote on the comments that you like, because we will read the comments in the end. So let's get started then.
Am I muted? Sorry. Yes, so this is the policy advice loop. It can be divided into 4 conceptual parts. The first is to put our ideas onto paper and developing them into policy proposals. The second is to refine one specific idea into a preliminary policy brief. The third is to collect feedback and editing our proposal. And the fourth is to pitch this to decision makers. The annual International Youth Conference is the first stage of the IYTT policy advice loop. It invites 20 to 30 participants from various backgrounds to a week-long conference that revolves around developing our ideas about what an open democratic society is, why it is important, what its challenges or alternatives are, and what we can do to improve it. The first International Youth Conference took place in 2019, Gothenburg, Sweden. I thought it was fun to meet like-minded individuals from other countries, but our vivid discussions, thought-provoking lectures, brainstorming sessions, training in presentation skills, and preparing our final presentation and conference report was also quite intense. I especially recall the words of a Greece participant: "You can sleep when you are dead," I think that sums it up. We had a lot of ideas on just about everything, but the time constraints would not allow us to include all of them. We therefore took our best ideas, the best of the best, and made them as clear and persuasive as possible. Writing policy proposals in less than a week will, whether you like it or not, become a trade-off between adding new ideas or presenting them in the best possible way. While assuring that everyone was included in the process, we felt that our proposals would stand a better chance if they came with adequate background information, structure and accurate language.
And I participated in the International Youth Conference 2020, so the year after Petter. And we were also supposed to meet in Gothenburg, just like they did the year before us. But due to COVID, we had to move the conference to online. And honestly, I was a bit disappointed at the conference being digital, since I personally believe that it is easier to create dynamic discussions in real life. But however, I was surprised about how well it went. We were all actively engaged the whole time. And I think this was because we had a very tight schedule with many different activities. We had breakout sessions, seminars, workshops, and guest lectures. And actually, this is a tip for you guys. I think that this is key when you want to work efficiently on a digital platform. It's important to keep all of the participants engaged and active by having time limits on all activities and to make sure that the formation of breakout rooms changes all the time so that everyone gets to speak with everyone. But in general, though, I would say that if it is possible to hold, for instance, brainstorming sessions or workshops in real life, it is still to prefer. Even though the conference that I went to went better than expected, I still believe that an on-site, like in-person conference would have led to even more interesting thoughts and ideas, especially since that makes you able to talk and hang out during breaks and during lunch. And now, just to finish talking about this first step of the process, just like Petter said, we also had many different ideas, and we struggled to choose only one to move forward with to the next step of the process.
Yes, so our first question would be on what basis would you pick participants for an international youth conference? Would you prioritize academic performance, personal commitment, and democratic experience? Or would you rather have a well-functioning team of individuals from different backgrounds? What matters when you want to facilitate change? Please share your reaction in the chat.
And you don't need any like certain knowledge or background knowledge to be able to answer this question. I mean, we're just kind of brainstorming. So we're just thinking, if you would have a conference where you want to create a policy proposal to like promote democracy, how would you choose your participants? Would you have them like 50-50 girls and boys? Would you do only young people, or would you do grown-ups as well? Like, how would you choose the participants? We're just curious to know. Okay, we have one comment saying personal commitment. I think that's a good one, actually, to make sure that people actually are committed to promoting democracy. I feel like that's crucial. And then someone else says as diverse as possible. I guess that has to do with representation, and I agree that could be really useful as well. Yeah, diversity seems to be a popular answer. Nice. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your comments. We will have more open questions like this later. Now I'm going to talk about the final conference report, which is the next step. So as we mentioned, during the conferences, all of the participants are continuously writing on a conference report in which we present the current state of democracy, the main democratic obstacles, and our own suggestions on political policies that can protect and improve democracy all over the world. The conference report from my conference is called Empowering People in Challenging Times, and it contains proposals in areas such as media, education, participation, equality, and representation. At the end of the conference, we finalized the conference report, and we started talking about which particular proposal we should bring forward and take on to the next step of the policy loop. And the next step is actually having a scientist do research about this subject. So I and the rest of the participants agreed on bringing forward one proposal regarding the importance of truth-keeping, since 2020 was a year characterized by conspiracy theories, discussions regarding COVID and the COVID vaccine, as well as the American presidential election, where Donald Trump not only spread fake news, but he also refused to accept losing the presidential election and kept claiming that the election was rigged. So these news kind of dominated media at the time of the conference last year. And therefore, we talked a lot about fake news, the need for serious journalism, and this type of issues.
Yes, and in our conference, we talked a lot about involving citizens in the decision-making process and the different alternatives to representative democracy. However, we did not include all our ideas in the final conference report because there were so many of them.
Okay, one more question for you guys. We have like 1 minute. The question is, would you rather improve your existing ideas or add new ones? We would like you to consider the difference between writing one good policy proposal or several policy proposals of lower quality. So please share your pros and cons. Like, what would you think is better? To just have one policy proposal like we did? Or do you think it's better if you work on several policy proposals, even though that might mean that they have a lower quality? And while you guys are typing, we want to say hi to Katharina and to Jan for joining our webinar. Right now, we are discussing this question that you can see on the screen regarding policy proposals.
Jag kör vidare.
Yes, so we will move on to the fourth stage of the policy proposal, which is the research overview. And up to this point, we had multiple interesting policy proposals to consider. But the cost of conducting a research overview meant that we could only select one policy proposal for the next stage. And we decided on community assemblies. It was an interesting complement to representative democracy, yet we didn't know much about how it could be structured, its pros and cons, and lessons from previous experiments. A research overview could identify key facts that would make our proposals more credible.
And as I mentioned, the proposal that we brought forward from the conference 2020 was about truth keeping. So that area was to be researched further by a scientist.
Yes, and the fifth stage is a working paper. A working paper can be in varying forms of completion, but it is formally a preliminary paper that has not been published and peer-reviewed in a scientific journal. So the working paper is basically what the researcher wrote for us. So this is the research overview.
The working paper from 2020 involves several different aspects of truth keeping, social media, journalism, and data privacy. It's the one to the right on the screen, by the way, and it ended up being over 50 pages long. So we realized that we definitely had to narrow it down in order to create one sharp policy proposal. And we saw that one chapter of this working paper touched upon journalistic immunity. And we all found this part very interesting. So we chose to move forward with this onto the next step, which is to create a policy brief draft. Next question is, we, as we said, were lucky enough to have a scientist who made this research overview and the working paper. The main step of this point is to improve and specify your proposal. But do you guys think that this can be done in some other way if you don't have access to a scientist? So basically, we want you to write something about, do you think that you as a student or as not a student would be able to perhaps do the working paper and the research overview by yourself? Or do you think that you have to ask a professional to do this part of the process? What are your thoughts? And while you're typing, we're saying hi to Kiara and to Alba. And if you guys feel like there's not enough time to type because you have so many thoughts, then we just want to remind you that at the end of this webinar, we will also bring up your questions and comments, the ones that we did not bring up now. Okay, we received some comments where some people seem to be worried that they need to have specialized knowledge, and then some other people who think that they can do a literature by themselves. So it seems to be sort of 50-50. Thank you for your comments.
So the sixth step, arguably the most interesting one or coolest one, in my opinion, is the policy brief and the policy brief drafts. So how do you write the policy brief draft? So my first step was to read the original idea from the final conference report. You know, all the ideas we've had, and then one specific idea we wanted to focus on. And then I read the entire working paper and searched for areas in the working paper that could substantiate the key components of the original idea. We then started brainstorming together and discussing what we would like to focus on and how we would structure the policy brief. It took multiple hours over several meetings to narrow down which key characteristics that our proposed community assemblies should have. We discussed, for example, when the Citizens Assembly would meet, if the participants should get compensated, how much they should be compensated, how we would finance it, how it would be taken seriously by decision makers, if training could play a role, what type of training we should provide, and so forth. Next, we began writing down our notes and organizing them around a proven structure: summary, background, policy alternative, policy recommendation, and conclusion. And then remained the exhaustive work of condensing everything to 2 pages. 2 pages that would convey everything in a clear way. And I think a very explanatory proverb goes, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. Oh.
And then if you've been paying attention, you notice that the next step of our policy loop is called European Youth Panels. And this step is where we in International Youth Think Tank send out questionnaires or surveys to young people across Europe in order to receive their opinions on the proposals that we are promoting. But we will not discuss this step any further though. So we will continue. And this step is called Citizens Panels. While we are working on turning our policy brief drafts into final policy briefs, there's a need for feedback, right? So we want to meet with ordinary citizens and discuss our proposals with them. This gives people who are not a part of the think tank a chance to voice their opinions. And it can also give us an opportunity to hear the perspectives of people who would not normally participate in the creation of a policy proposal. This is a very valuable part of our policy loop, and we're trying to make sure that our youth fellows, such as myself and Petter, try to organize meetings with locals and discuss our proposals with them. During the spring of 2021, Petter and myself went to Gothenburg, to an area called Lövgärdet, in order to talk to locals about our proposals. And they had many valuable thoughts and feedback, which we then forwarded to the rest of their group. And then we had these comments in mind when we rewrote our policy brief draft into a final policy brief. Next question. How do you guys think that a citizens panel is best set up? Because our aim is to receive feedback on proposals from people who would not normally be part of a think tank. But how do you think that these people are best reached? And how does one choose where to go? So basically, we are a think tank, so we are already people who are very interested in democracy and politics. But when we want to receive the opinions and the feedback of people who are not already a part of the organization, how should we do it? Like, where do you find ordinary citizens to give feedback to? Do you think you should just interview people at the city center, or what is like a good method to use? Someone said we could go to the supermarket to just meet locals because everyone needs to go to the supermarket. That's actually true. We never thought of that. So that's actually, the supermarket would be a good place to meet like a very diverse group of people. And then someone else said organize an event. That's a good idea. But then I guess the risk is that people who are already interested in democracy will come. And we're trying to reach even people who are not interested. And someone else said use social media. I think that's a good one, to use social media a lot. Thank you for your comments. We will continue. Now, once the policy brief is completed, it is time to launch the final policy brief. And in the International Youth Think Tank, we decided to launch our policy brief at Almedalen. Almedalen is a large political event in Sweden. It happens annually, and that's where policymakers, stakeholders, and representatives from various companies and organizations go to basically to meet and to have discussions. And at Almedalen, one of our youth fellows presented our policy brief and handed it over to a Swedish politician. So that's basically the final step.
If you would like to learn more about policy proposals, our policy proposals, please visit our website on internationalyoutthinktank.com. All our published materials is available there.
And that was basically the final step of our process. But as you might have noticed, we keep calling this process the policy advice loop. And this is because it's a circular process that never really comes to a full stop. So after the final policy brief has been launched, we are calling on new young people to join us for next year's youth conference. And at that conference, we expect the participants to read policy briefs from previous years and to reflect on them and perhaps improve, but also be inspired by the policy briefs from previous years. So that's why this is called a loop process. Now we are done with the presentation part, and it's time for questions and comments. And we have one question here from Jan, and it says, how can I become a member of International Youth Think Tank? Petter, do you want to answer?
Yeah, sure. Of course, we should tell you this because we want to tell you this. So each year we have. I can go back to first slide. So this is the policy advice loop, right? And the first step is the annual International Youth Conference. So each year you can apply for the annual International Youth Think Tank. So you will provide some information about yourself, maybe a cover letter. And then if you are, there's a lot of people applying, but if you get into the International Youth Conference, you will automatically become a youth fellow. And once you're a youth fellow, you can be involved in all of the think tank's work. And I think the best way to stay engaged is to visit our website, the internationalyoutthinktank.com. It's a pretty nice website, and you will find all relevant information there.
Thank you for your question, Jan. There was also a question from earlier, and I believe it was for Hans Dahlgren, the EU minister, but he didn't have time to reply to it. So perhaps I and Petter can try and reply to it. The question is from Kayla, and it goes, how can people engage and be involved in the EU without having a degree or an EU job? Do you have any suggestions specifically for students? I would say definitely think tanks. And I mean, think tanks are not specifically, they don't have to be specifically aimed towards the EU. It's more of, I guess, the International Youth Think Tank aims at Europe more and European issues. But I believe this is a great way to get engaged and to, just as Hans said earlier, to gain knowledge about politics and what's going on in the world, as well as to get contacts, to gain like a contact network. So I would definitely recommend looking up think tanks and NGOs and organizations that work to promote questions that you really care about. And then Petter, do you have some other advice?
Yeah, I would say that there are a lot of non-governmental organizations and like unpaid positions that you can take. Like there is you can get involved in political parties. Maybe they don't talk a lot about the European Union, but they have some events on the European Union. You can perhaps go into the United Nations or any non-for-profits organizations would work, I think. Yeah, so if you have any questions on the policy advice loop, or if you want to perhaps bring up some questions from or like reactions to our early comments, please do that, and we will try to answer them to the best of our ability.
I can bring up some of the comments that we didn't have time to read earlier. When we talked about how to choose participants for a youth conference, I see that many of you really value the importance of people with different perspectives and from different backgrounds. And I really agree. I think this is very important as well. And it would be really nice to have like it would be really nice to have a discussion about that in the think tank in the future. Like how should we have some type of quotation system to make sure that we have some people from different countries or cultures or I don't know, school, like degrees at university. It's a really, really interesting issue when you talk about these type of questions like democracy.
Yes, so thank you for your time. I think we will wrap up this session now. And if you have any more questions or are interested in the International Youth Think Tank, don't hesitate to reach out to us or visit our webpage. And with those words, thank you a lot for listening, and I wish you all the best in the future. Thank you.